This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Before I jump into my guest today, I have a request. I'm putting out this PSA, this public service announcement, which I don't think I've done for several years on this podcast. If you enjoy this show, if you demand that I make more free content, go to iTunes and write a review. I would most appreciate it. I will send you no gift. I will send you no money. I probably won't even send you a thank you unless you send me an email. If you send me an email, I will surely respond, guaranteed. But if you enjoy this show, go to iTunes. Easily found. Go to iTunes, type my last name in, Covel. The podcast will pop right up. I would love to see your reviews. See your insights. Why do you enjoy this show? Or why do I trigger you to go off into some kind of loony land? Who knows what happens? But please go to iTunes and construct a review. My guest today is the 6th Nobel Prize winner in economics to appear on this show. His name, Oliver Hart, a British-born American economist, currently the Andrew Fuhr Professor of Economics at Harvard University. Together with Bengt Holmstrom, he received the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences in 2016. I always consider it an honor that so many wise people will come on this show to give me their insights, especially somebody with really bad grades who is a political science major. Now, don't get me wrong, that's just talking about a certain period in my life. Obviously, I buckled down, and maybe I did not go the traditional route, but I've kind of figured out a few things here and there. Those few things that I've figured out, not really things that I knew about before this show. And not surprisingly, for most of you out there, we've not thought about the very issues that Oliver Hart has pulled together over the course of a career which has culminated recently in a Nobel Prize. He's an expert in contract theory. And once you take the theoretical to that, the permutations, the possibilities are endless. We can all ponder the recesses of our mind and think about how many contracts we've signed over the course of our lifetime. Were they good? Were they bad? Did we do the right thing? Did we get the money or did we get the rights? Oh yes, it gets a lot more complicated than that. Without any further buildup from me, let me jump right in to my conversation with Oliver Hart. One forewarning, I think there's a few minutes at the beginning, 10 or 15 minutes, where I had a spotty connection. So please don't hold that against me, and don't hold it against Oliver. But at some point in time in the conversation, I bit the bullet, interrupted the call, and started over on a different connection. And at that point in time, the conversation went really smooth. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Oliver Hart. So, Professor, I want you to take me back in time, because for most people, and I'm curious to your perspective too, I mean, winning a Nobel Prize is it's a pretty fantastic achievement. I would love for you to take me back in time to an early point in your career where you can start to give my audience some perspective on the germination of what would become your life's work, which would ultimately lead to this recognition by the Nobel Committee. What was that early stage that allowed you to start to think, gosh, this world of contracts, there's something here, and I'm going to go down this rabbit hole for my career? How did that start to unfold early on?
It was a gradual process. I didn't start working on contracts. When I got my PhD from Princeton, I was interested in general equilibrium under uncertainty. I was particularly interested in the behavior of firms. So actually, the theory of the firm, in a way, was a topic of interest for me from the beginning. But at that time, I was interested in what an appropriate objective function for a firm was under uncertainty, because traditionally economists assume that firms maximize profit or something like that. In an uncertain world where you don't have a full set of markets, a firm's profits are uncertain. I mean, that's clear if you think about it. Just think of the world in which we live. When a firm chooses some strategy, it may work out well, it may work out badly. Profits are uncertain, and how you can't maximize an uncertain number. What is the appropriate generalization of profit maximization to uncertainty? Anyway, I was sort of interested in this issue. Over time, my interest moved a bit, so I got interested in not so much in what the firm should do, but how you get the managers of the firm to do what the shareholders want. So there's a huge literature on this, the principal agent problem. Actually, you could say that my co-laureate, Bengt Holmström, was really recognized for his work in that area. But I was certainly interested in that too. So, it goes back to Adam Smith, the idea that let's suppose the shareholders do want the firm to maximize something like profit, or it could be market value, but, the firm is run by managers with their own interests. And so how do you align managerial interests with shareholder interests? So, I spent a bit of time on that. Actually, it was that led me to contracts, because the natural way to analyze that problem is in terms of the contract that shareholders will write with management. Managers may have their own interests. The way you align a managerial and shareholder interests is by having some sort of optimal contract between the shareholders and the managers. So you could say this was the early 80s now. I got my PhD in 1974, and we've now sort of moved a few years into the early 80s. But then I think the critical moment for me happened, and I've sort of described this a bit in my Nobel lecture, when I was working with Sanford Grossman, had been for some years, and in 1983, in his office at the University of Chicago, we were thinking about what to work on next, and we decided to consider a question that had been analyzed before, but only rather somewhat informally, the question is, what is the difference between carrying out a transaction through a contract and inside a firm? So it's the boundaries of the firm or make or buy decision. You can think of it in terms of outsourcing. I'm a firm, I want some input. I could write a contract, I could outsource it contractually, so have some other company, if you like, provide it, and then I'll write a contract with them. Or I could do the whole operation in-house and have my own employees do it. What's the difference? And this question goes back to Ronald Coe's very famous paper in 1937, and he won the Nobel Prize for that. Well, not just for that, but partly for that, in 1991, I think. And then Oliver Williamson has also worked on it and won a Nobel Prize in 2009. But anyway, here we're back in 1983. We just thought this was an interesting question. And of course, the way, you're forced to analyze that in terms of contracts, because you're asking yourself, what's the difference between having your own employees do it and contracting with an outside provider?
I'd be amiss if I didn't ask. You have this idea to go in this direction. You call it an interesting question. Was there the light bulb moment for you where you were just saying, we know we're onto something almost immediately because no one's gone down this path?
Well, let me just say, so this was 1983. So we just sort of thought, how about analyzing this question? And we started to think about it a bit more formally, because that was our comparative advantage, Grossman and I. And then let me say, I continued this work later with John Moore. We're all microeconomic theorists, formally trained and believing in a formal approach as being the right approach. And so we thought, let's see what formal analysis can add to this. And pretty quickly, Grossman and I realized that it had something to do with incomplete contracts and the idea that the contracts people write have gaps in them. And then the question is how to fill out the gaps. And that led us to the idea of residual control rights or residual decision rights. That was so I hadn't, up to that point, to the extent I thought about contracts, they had been, complete contracts. I'd never really thought about the holes in contracts. But this was something, a bit of an eye-opener. And once we'd had that realization, I felt, wow, this is kind of really interesting and worth sticking with. I can assure you I wasn't thinking about Nobel Prizes. I was just thinking about, this is a kind of meaty question. We seem to have something new to say about it, and I just felt it was, as I say, it was worth pursuing, and I ended up spending a lot of time on it. Maybe, I'm not sure I anticipated that, but it just seemed a good, and one is always looking for good questions. There are not that many good questions that people haven't analyzed to death. And this seemed to be one, so that's how it happened. So the light bulb moment, if you like, or the moment which took me down, was the beginning of a new path, was the summer of 1983 for me.
Can I ask, when you went down that path, was it just you're a guy with a PhD already, you've been in academia, you're used to solving problems, tackling problems. Was this something different in terms of the emotion for you? Did your emotional engagement to the question you're now going to chase, did that jump up a lot at that moment in time, or was it still just kind of an iterative process where you're moving forward?
Grossman and I spent 10 very intense days working on this in the summer of 1983, and we produced a paper about a year later, and started circulating it, talking about it. I felt this was an important paper. So you don't always feel that, or even often feel that. I wouldn't say it's the only time I've ever felt that. Sometimes I've been wrong. One often overestimates the significance of what one is doing. It's part, in a way you have to be a bit bullish, because otherwise you would never actually even write the thing, So we I think irrational exuberance or optimism is part of the business model. I think I did feel this was an important, I felt a little different about this. I thought it was really significant. And I turned out to be right. But it wasn't as if it was a very smooth path to getting, I think actually other people did rather quickly think there was something new here. In that sense, it had a good reaction. But over time, it wasn't as if everybody suddenly said, well, this is, something we should all work on, and this is the new way of doing things. They were kind of respectful of it, but they carried on doing their own thing anyway. But anyway, the short answer to your question is I felt we'd made some progress on an important question, and that's probably why I kept going on it.
It's one of these things when I really love speaking with someone that's gone down a very narrow path to uncover something. And I think when you look at something like contracts, we just can't prepare for every eventuality. We can't know. And so how does one start to think, what's that schematic? What's that matrix of all the contingencies that could possibly happen? And again, you can't know.
Exactly.
Let me take you into another path. For example, something like venture capital. Right, you can look at there's so many young people right now, they head to Silicon Valley and they have dreams of just making a bloody fortune. But there's a lot of things that go into, take into account on the contract path when you show up in Silicon Valley with your idea. Are you going to aim for a lot of money up front, or are you going to aim for more control in the back end?
That's exactly right, and that is where I think this approach has also been helpful, because venture capital is a great application. My work is about control. I talk about residual control rights, but the shorthand version of that is just control. Who has control? And in these venture capital contracts with entrepreneurs, it turns out that cash flow rights are not the only important thing. Control is also very important. And I think people who've studied these, again, this may be a case where many of the practitioners understood this, I think, but some perhaps didn't understand it well enough. But economists who were studying those contracts, for a while they were looking at them as a solution to a classic agency problem, principal agent. Earlier, when you think in principal agent terms, you think about how you design incentives to align the interests of the various parties. Here, you've got the venture capitalist who puts up the money. You've got the entrepreneur who's, let's say, going to be the CEO who's running the operation. You can think of them as being the agent. And so how do you align the CEO's incentives with the venture capitalists? So if that's your mindset, then it's all about who should have shares, who should have options, who should have convertible this and convertible that to bring about this alignment. You're not really thinking about control, because you have to bring in a new ingredient to get control in there, and that new ingredient is that the contract's incomplete. And agency theory doesn't really focus on that. But once you look at it the way my co-authors and I were looking at it, then you immediately see that, of course, who has residual rights of control? That's going to be very important. And so then you look at these contracts in different ways, in a new way. And indeed, there was a very good, important paper on this by Steve Kaplan and Per Stromberg published in 2003. I mean, they went and looked at the contracts that are actually written between venture capitalists and entrepreneurs, but they did so with the perspective of incomplete contracts as well as agency theory. They had both in their heads when they looked at these contracts, and they saw, the contracts were sort of responding to both sets of issues, the incentive alignment issue and the allocating control efficiently issue. But to come back to what you said, I think people who are going into these deals would be well advised to understand what's going on, because some of them make mistakes. I think entrepreneurs, and people have written about this, entrepreneurs who go in, as you were saying, are too focused on the getting rich part of it, which is the cash flow rights, how much equity they have, and that kind of thing, and don't really pay enough attention to the other thing, which is who's on the board and who can get rid of whom, and in particular, under what conditions can the venture capitalist decide, you know what, Oliver, you're not really doing a great job. We don't like the direction in which you're going, and we're going to remove you as CEO. And I think to myself, oh my God, how did I get into that? Well, because I didn't pay enough attention to the allocation of control, votes, board seats in the initial contract.
You make the point so far too. Is it, on the surface, it sounds quite common sense, quite straightforward, but it's amazing how, when you look over time and assorted contracts, how many people don't get what they think they're signing on to, or in the future it doesn't work out that way. I'll give you a great example that I've thought about recently. In the 1970s in America, a young producer, agent came along named David Geffen. And David Geffen signed acts like Jackson Browne, the Eagles, Linda Ronstadt, Fleetwood Mac, all these great artists. If you look at 2018 right now, and I go to Wikipedia, David Geffen is the one that's worth many billions of dollars, not the artists.
Yeah. Well, that might be the allocation of cash flow rights, right, rather than control. But yes, I mean, many of these, once you've had these insights, because these are qualitative insights, they're not formulae. Some economics is helpful. It actually says the answer is the square root of 2. Well, it doesn't actually usually say that, but there are some things which are more quantitative. My work is more conceptual, and at the end of it, the insights sometimes do seem, at least to some people, fairly obvious. Isn't that natural? But the fact is, unless it turns out that until someone really points out to you that this is a key factor, you may miss it. You see it. It's one of 25 factors. It's kind of in a fog of things.
100%. I found myself thinking that as I was going through your work. I was like, okay, this seems so straightforward. Why did I not ponder this before? And I'm sure many people have that same feeling when they go through your work.
They may think they should have won the Nobel Prize, But, but if they read the work more carefully, then they'll see, well, maybe there's a bit more to it. Who knows? I hope so.
This can get a lot more complicated. You talk about the theoretical aspect. Once you start to add in multiple players, this can get, from a theoretical perspective, it can get quite complicated to really start to think about, okay, what does the playing field really look like? And who is gunning for example, those residual rights? Where are those residual rights in this playing field? It becomes quite maddening when you start to think about how complex it can get.
Yeah. On
that brief yes, that brief agreement. Let me take you to something else, which I think is really interesting about your career, because your career is gone in many directions, and I want to talk about some behavioral stuff in a moment. But you had a really interesting statement, thought, some writing that came out following the 2008 financial crisis. I would love for you to elaborate on that again, because we're 10 years on. I mean, I thought what happened in the fall of 2008, I thought, my gosh, this is crazy. Some investment banks are being saved, some aren't. They're mixing in taxpayers' dollars. It seems like some investors are getting sweetheart deals, all kinds of stuff that just didn't make any sense from just a basic market fairness situation. And you put a view out there. I want you to expand on that view, but you put a view out there that did not necessarily have everybody else or a lot of the mainstream other economists liking your point of view. Why don't you explain?
Yeah, but my point of view is a little similar to what you just said. Your point of view was that I think that it's dangerous to start intervening in what seemed to me, at least at the time, to be fairly ad hoc, arbitrary ways. The defense was, and that most economists seem to buy this defense, the defense was, this is an unprecedented crisis, or at least, since the Great Depression. We haven't seen anything like this. The world is going up in smoke. I mean, this is basically what Ben Bernanke and what was the name of the Treasury Secretary? I'm blanking on his name. No, not Geithner, the one before that. Paulson, yeah. All right, Paulson. Paulson and I think Bernanke came, did they not? I don't want to accuse anybody of saying something they didn't say, but I seem to recall they appeared in public and basically said, it was Friday, said the world is going to end on Monday unless we do something. It was pretty dramatic language, and I thought it was totally overblown, because I don't think that, a financial crisis, it's not like 9/11. Well, I say 9/11 because people were killed, buildings were destroyed. With a financial crisis, no physical assets, or human assets for that matter, have disappeared. Right? We're talking about pieces of paper, and we're talking about the fact that some claims no longer add up, and so we may need to make some adjustments. We actually have mechanisms in advanced capitalist economies to do that. Bankruptcy procedure is a leading example. Now, somehow, the view was that when a lot of investment banks or other banks go down at the same time, this is a completely different situation. You can't use normal procedures. It's a unique situation, and it calls for unique remedies, and the remedy is for the government, the Federal Reserve, to take dramatic action and save some people. But it all looked a bit arbitrary to me, because, and maybe to you too, I mean, if you think of the fact that Bear Stearns was saved, but Lehman Brothers was not saved, AIG was saved. The Fed, I mean, including Ben Bernanke, I mean, they've claimed that their hands were tied, and they, given the constraints they operate under, they couldn't save Lehman Brothers, but they could save Bear Stearns. I have to say that I'm I continue to be very skeptical about that, and I think quite a few other people are. So it all looks kind of arbitrary to me, and I think when you do arbitrary things, maybe in the short run it works, but there's usually a long run cost to pay. And I have to say that I think, and this is, people will be arguing about this for decades or longer, but to me, the kind of political changes we've seen in the last few years and the rise of populism, Trump, first the Tea Party, then Trump, and populism around in lots of countries. I think part of the reason for this is that people felt that the system was rigged, to use a well-known phrase. They think the system was rigged because they think that Wall Street was bailed out, or not all of Wall Street, but some of Wall Street was bailed out. Main Street wasn't bailed out. And I can agree with people who think that. The whole thing looked unfair. The fact that the people with mortgages were not helped, but bankers were helped. The fact that it seemed impossible to prosecute any bankers for bad behavior. I still find this quite extraordinary because there seemed to be a lot of bad behavior around. Maybe not as much as we initially thought. So I think it is interesting that there has been some, as far as I understand, very solid economic research showing that, some of the accusations that were made that bankers, had these dodgy mortgages and then they sold them off because they knew they were bad. Actually, in many cases, they weren't selling them off. In fact, they were, I'm trying to remember exactly what the bankers were doing, but maybe they were buying houses at the very same, when everyone said, of course, everyone knows that house prices are not going up, but they themselves were acting in their own individual account as if house prices were going to go up. So, in fact, a lot of it was not fraud or misbehavior. It was irrational exuberance. They were fooled themselves, some of these wealthy people, but then not all of them, surely. So I think it didn't look good that none of these people ended up in jail.
You're a guy that has spent your career, as you've used the word several times in this conversation, theoretical. So if you have to put, with all the experience you've had, the wisdom of looking at these many situations over the years, if we look at the fall of 2008, we look at those many actions that took place that just look arbitrary, and one has to imagine into the future, it seems like it can be almost as uncertain as what might not be in a contract in terms of, it used to be that maybe, hey, if the markets go a certain direction and somebody's over leveraged, then they're gone. They expire. That's capitalism. The market exerted its influence and now they're gone.
Well, let me just interrupt you there, because I think expire is perhaps, you used the word, I used it because you used it, but we've got to be careful with a word like that when we're talking about companies and as opposed to individuals who die. Companies, when they get into trouble, if they have a lot of debt and they can't, and then, they're hit by some shock and they can't pay their creditors, we have a procedure. It's called a bankruptcy procedure. And that bankruptcy procedure can lead to the company being saved, emerging from bankruptcy as a going concern with a new capital structure, a new debt structure, in other words. And the reason is very important. This company, think of a company which is, worth $100 alive and worth $80 dead. And now I'm using the word dead to mean if you took its assets and sold them off piecemeal, maybe. So we could say, even though I just said let's not use the word, but you could say that's the end of the company because it's just the assets are all over the place. So it could be worth 80 in that situation, but as a going concern, it could be worth more. That is often the case. It's not always the case, but it can be the case. So let's say it's worth $100 as a going concern. But imagine that for some reason it has debt in the amount of $120. Because, maybe it used to be worth much more than 100. It used to be worth $150, but then it was hit by a shock, and so it's now it's only worth 100. It's still worth more than if it was liquidated. Piecemeal liquidation, it would be at 80. Debt, 120. This is a situation where the efficient outcome is for the company to keep going, because 100 is bigger than 80. But obviously, it can't pay the creditors 120 because it's only worth 100. So they're going to have to take a haircut on their debt. And this is what bankruptcy procedure is meant to achieve. U.S. Chapter 11 bankruptcy. That's what it's meant to be all about. It's a negotiation where the company persuades the creditors, we can't pay you the full 120, but you're better off taking a haircut and reducing your debt to 100, because rather than pushing for the end of the company, which would be this piecemeal liquidation, you'd only get 80. I just want to say that can happen, and essentially what I was arguing in the article you mentioned was that we should use those procedures. We should have used them for the investment banks, including Bear Stearns, as opposed to having the government save some of them and not save other ones, which seemed arbitrary to me. Just before you come back, the counter-argument, of course, was, well, it's one thing, and this perhaps, I think this matches up to what you were saying. It's one thing when, in a normal economy, some companies are doing badly, and we say, okay, let them go into bankruptcy. But people say, oh, it's entirely different when everyone's going down at the same time, particularly the elements of the banking system, commercial banks, investment banks. That's somehow a different world. We can't just have them all going into bankruptcy at the same time. That's a whole new ball game. We've got to do something entirely different. And I was questioning that.
The deviation from the bankruptcy procedure, the bankruptcy process, and given the fact that the counter that you just described at the end of your answer there, but the deviation from that bankruptcy process now to look ahead 10 years into the future, to look ahead another 10 years, doesn't the deviation from that, which leaving so many people, and you mentioned the rise of populism, leaving so many people feeling disenfranchised, look, just from a basic planning ahead standpoint, and here we're talking about the uncertainty in contracts, but the uncertainty that creates or created from 2008 going forward into the future, I look at something like the current blockchain mania is taking place. I mean, to me, it seems like, hey, maybe the blockchain technologies will be great technologies, maybe they won't, but it seems like if the powers that be, looking at the fall of 2008, decide something doesn't fit, they could just stop it. And I think that you're connecting the dots there on the rise of populism to those types of actions where people just can't wrap their arms around who's making the decisions and why.
Okay, you combine a lot of things there. I'm not sure. Let me just say, let me kind of pull them apart a little. So first of all, on the other side of me would be economists who would say now, 2018, look, the economy is doing very well. We dodged a bullet back in 2008. It was a disaster, and the government's policies, partly through the Federal Reserve System, in terms of helping out some banks, providing kind of life support, and also in terms of new kinds of open market operations. I mean, buying bonds and various other financial claims, getting into the business of buying those, which is not normal practice for the Fed. But this is all incredibly important in saving the system, and then followed by the Obama stimulus plan, which of course could have been even bigger if Congress had been more sympathetic. But all those things have actually restored the U.S. economy, which has done better than other economies. Other economies are now beginning to revive as well. But in fact, the U.S. economy revived faster. Now we have, low unemployment, and wages are beginning to rise. Of course, the stock market was looking wonderful. Now it's looking a little less wonderful. But basically, in terms of the sort of key indicators, the economy is doing pretty well. So, many people would say this just proves that the whole thing, the response to the crisis was very, very successful. I am one who is doubtful about that because just to repeat, I'm kind of repeating myself, but I think the political consequences, that just doesn't take into account all the sort of political undercurrents we're seeing, and even though the economy is doing well, a lot of people don't feel they're doing well, and that's leading to all sorts of political tensions and frictions. And I do think that was a negative consequence of what the government did back then. Now, moving to the blockchain, I think is a very different thing. Why do you connect them? That's a kind of private innovation.
I connect them in this sense that if a currency outside of central banks actually got some traction and was really quite successful, that seems like that would be a risk to established players.
Yes. And actually, you could see it. So now I also see you could say it's partly because of an increased suspicion of government that people want to kind of circumvent it. So you could think of Bitcoin. And of course, some people say, well, Bitcoin is all about facilitating criminal activity and doing things which the tax authorities can't see and all that kind of thing. And maybe there's more of that because people have lost their trust in government. So you could say, that's part of it. I think, let me make a distinction between Bitcoin and blockchain. Let me also say that I feel very ignorant about these things. Blockchain, I'm beginning to understand a little bit about, but it's a slow process. Blockchain seems to have some possibly real benefits. I'm not sure it's going to transform the world, but it seems to be a way of keeping track of certain transactions so we can all see what's going on. And I think that can be helpful to facilitate certain kinds of trades, maybe also some bad trades, but there could be some productivity benefit there. Bitcoin, I'm far more skeptical about. Like many economists, I don't really see why Bitcoin should have long-run value. Economists have enough difficulty explaining why money has value. Fiat currency, this is an old question in economics. If everybody thought that dollar bills were not going to have any value, then when I go to the store and want to buy something using dollar bills, the seller would say, wait, no, I'm not going to accept those because I don't believe anybody else is going to accept them. And actually, it's an equilibrium, what economists call an equilibrium. It could possibly be an equilibrium for everyone to wake up one day and say, I don't think that dollar bills are going to have any value anymore. And then they wouldn't, because I wouldn't accept them if I think the next person's not going to accept them. So then, of course, it becomes a mystery as to why that doesn't happen and why instead we seem to be in an equilibrium where everybody does accept dollar bills. One difference, so economists are still thinking about this, still haven't quite got the answer to this question, but one thing they have said is, well, one feature of dollars is that, the government makes you pay your taxes. We have to pay our taxes, otherwise we go to jail. And one way we can pay our taxes is using dollar bills. So the government has said we'll accept those for tax purposes. So that is one respect in which they are useful, and that could actually sustain their value. Now, when it comes to Bitcoin, Bitcoin is like fiat currency, dollar bills, without that sort of government support behind it of the kind you can always pay your taxes with it. Many economists would say the equilibrium where we wake up tomorrow and Bitcoin has zero value, that's a much more realistic possibility, and it could happen any day. And I think many economists actually think it will happen. That is the only long-run outcome, that this bubble will burst and people will realize there's no intrinsic value to a Bitcoin. It's not like a piece of gold, which has some other use, which gives it value. Bitcoin is something where it really is the case that if we suddenly all decide that Bitcoin has no value, then it has no value. So I'm one of those people who actually thinks the world is very complicated. So, of course, I could be wrong, and other economists can be wrong, but we sort of think it could well just disappear, along with all these other similar currencies. I think, in contrast, blockchain is a little different.
I know one of your current directions, and we discussing Bitcoin, there's a lot of behavioral aspects to watching the trading of Bitcoin and the enthusiasm for Bitcoin. I've had my share of conversations with millennials right now, and they are just Maybe they'll be right, but they are so in deep right now on the belief of how everything is going to unfold. Why don't you, in our limited time left, why don't you lay out for the audience some of the paths that you've been going down in your own behavioral work? Because I know that's been something kind of a new path for you these days.
The reason I got into it is that let's go back to contracts. Let me just say, I'm going to throw in one thing before I get to that very quickly, which is, we were talking about, when sometimes they may seem a little obvious once you've seen them. But then when I look at, and I was talking about in practice, people often, well, perhaps I wasn't saying this, but let me say it. In practice, they often don't seem to be really using those insights or aware of them. We see this with outsourcing all the time, particularly with government outsourcing, and we see just tons of examples of, it's been true in the UK just recently. There have been, news scandals about various services that the government has outsourced, and it's been a disaster. People in nursing homes who, are being not looked after and in horrible conditions because the government actually went with the private contracting route for looking after old people. And then there's a very big outsourcing firm in the UK that just went bankrupt, and people always seem to be relearning the same lessons that, they think at some moment people say, the government can save a lot of money by outsourcing everything, by privatizing everything. And, for a while that may look like a brilliant strategy. And then, a few years later, lots of problems emerge. And then people say, well, that's funny. I mean, why didn't we think of that? And the answer is if they'd had a kind of decent conceptual framework of the kind that people like me are trying to provide, then actually they might have sort of thought about the problems that could arise from the beginning. And it's not just going to be a matter of some fad. Okay, that's not the answer to your new question, but I thought I'd just throw that in.
It's a great point, though, because that is really the foundation of what I've taken from your work, is to really sit down with a wide open mind to think of all the if-thens on the playing field that you can possibly think of, versus the bull in the china closet just marching off in any particular direction without doing the kind of full playing field analysis.
That's well put, and that's exactly, I think, the point of it's what I think I can bring to the table, if anything. It's that. Back to the behavioral stuff. So it turns out I was I'm a classically trained economist, which means, most economists think that most important phenomena, or used to think this at least, could be explained using the assumption that people are rational. In other words, I'm sure from, way back, economists, it's not that they thought that everybody was rational when they decide, in their daily lives, individuals, when they decide on saving or their pensions or this or that, or firms are deciding what to invest in. It wasn't that, or how to price things. It wasn't that economists weren't aware that people make mistakes or anything like that, but they probably thought that to understand the big things, we don't need to bring those, focus on those kinds of errors. If we're trying to understand business cycles, say, or recessions, it's not because some people are irrational. And I sort of adopted that view myself. So when I was going back to 1983, when I was starting to work on trying to understand why some transactions take place inside firms and some via contract or in the marketplace, if somebody had said to me, you need to drop the assumption that individual agents are rational, I would have said, come on, don't be ridiculous. It can't be right. But over time, I was forced, because it turns out that in trying to understand better why contracts are incomplete, I got into a debate with some fellow economists, and we can't go into the details here, but suffice it to say that two other Nobel laureates, Eric Maskin and Jean Tirole, I don't know whether you've talked to them or plan to talk to them, but anyway, they using some ideas from what's called mechanism design theory, they argued, this is all theory, that they argued that there were clever ways of getting around contractual incompleteness, and actually, weird mechanisms you could use to sort of, even though you couldn't foresee all the things that could happen, you could sort of think about the value consequences of things that might happen and come up with some mechanism which would deal with the problem. It's not the kind of contract or mechanism you could actually imagine any real people in the real world using. It's sort of mind-boggling. But it seemed the natural consequence of assuming people were rational. If people were really rational, they could actually and should actually use these weird mechanisms that we never see. So my reluctant conclusion, after having satisfied myself that they were right, that these mechanisms really would solve the problem, I came to the conclusion that the answer had to be that people couldn't be super rational in the way that they assumed or I was implicitly assuming. And so that led me, reluctantly at first, but then I sort of embraced it. I went down the path of saying, let's start thinking about what happens when people party to transactions, and sometimes we're talking about big companies, let's assume they're not super rational. Now, the particular irrationality I introduced, and irrationality may not even be the right word, but it's a departure from standard assumptions in economics, was a concern for fairness. By fairness, I mean something very particular. I mean that if we're in a contractual setting and we wrote an incomplete contract, say, and then later on we have to decide what to do, well, at this point, if I decide, let's suppose actually I have the right to make some decision, could be a residual control we were talking about earlier, that I could have the right to decide something, but I need to be worried now a bit about you not thinking that the decision I made was unreasonable. If I make a decision which may be good for me, but you think is unreasonable, that could elicit some counterproductive behavior from you, because you might, to use a technical term, you might be pissed off. And you might then just underperform as a kind of retaliation. This is what I've introduced into my recent work, and it's not traditional, because in traditional economics, or traditional economic theory, non-behavioral economic theory, since people are always rational, you would not underperform just because you were annoyed with me. The traditional view would be either you can get away with underperforming anyway and perhaps save a little bit of money, in which case you'll always do it, or it's not beneficial for you to underperform, in which case you'll never do it. But you'll switch this on or off according to whether it improves your bottom line. Whereas what I'm now arguing is, well, you might do it just because you're annoyed with me. This retaliation is not based on self-interest on your part. Or if it is, it's a much sort of longer not any sort of short-run thing. But, I mean, basically, you would do it because you feel I didn't act in a reasonable way. So that means, in that kind of world, it's not having the legal right to do something isn't enough. I also have to bring you on board, and I may modify my behavior in order to do something which is a little more reasonable from your point of view. And this opens the door to new possibilities. So that's what I've been working on recently. But let me just say, it's not something that other people necessarily are that enthusiastic about, because although behavioral economics has made huge inroads into economics, the devil is in the details, and the particular way that you model how people, what people think is fair, what people think is unfair, when they get annoyed about things and react negatively, and when you don't. Well, you write down you make some assumptions about that, and other people say, hey, I don't really agree with that empirically. I don't think you've got it right. Your particular assumptions don't appeal to me, and so I've had some difficulty in getting other people on board with this.
I just can think of a personal example right now where I'm dealing with a contractor, and he is 100% underperforming because he's annoyed. It doesn't help his situation at all. It's completely irrational for him. It's not in his own self-interest, but he absolutely is sabotaging himself. Now, that's just one little example.
He's annoyed with you.
He's annoyed with me for, for reasons probably that I don't really understand. But I can look at it kind of objectively and see that he's not getting the most out of it that he should.
This is much newer stuff. This is a work in progress. I continue to work on this because, it's much more speculative. I've written papers about it, but I'm not sure I've nailed it yet by any means. So it's I continue to work on it.
But that's the process, right? That's your process. You have to take a chance, take a risk, go out there, do the work, and see how it happens, right?
Yes.
Professor, thank you for taking the time today. We can send everybody to you at Harvard to check you out, see your papers, etc.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks. It was actually fun.
Hey, come on, that's one of the best compliments I can get. You're the sixth Nobel Prize winner to appear on this show, and it was actually fun. My gosh, I'm getting better at this.
Michael, you're a good interviewer.
Thank you, sir.
I'll tell you that.
Okay, I appreciate it. Take care. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye now.
As an extra bonus, you will notice around the 13-minute mark, the audio got bad. I told you that would happen in the intro. What follows is a 6-minute Q&A from me and the professor that was around the 13-minute mark. It got a little rough, but I wanted to save it for those of you that wanted to hear it all because you can still understand what he's saying. The audio is just bad. So I'm adding that to the very end of the interview as a little bonus, a bad quality audio bonus. Enjoy. Let me let you dig in and give a nice broad overview to the audience. I saw your lecture for the Nobel Committee and the acceptance, your Nobel lecture, but I would love for you to give a nice example. You can reach back into your famous one with the coal power plant, the electricity company, or you could give another one that we could start to build off and let people understand why it was so important to find these new insights about contracts.
Well, I think the most important innovation was really the basic idea that we had that if contracts are incomplete, which they are, and I'm not sure actually people have really come up with a great explanation as to exactly why they are, but in practice it seems that even the best lawyers, that you have to write your contracts, if we're talking about a complicated transaction, and I will pick just, as an example, the electricity coal one, where the electricity company sites its plant next to the coal mine with the hope of an intention of getting coal for decades from this mine to burn to make electricity. And actually, it's a good one in the following sense that if you're writing the contract in 1970, there's so many things you cannot anticipate. The energy market's going to change. There are going to be new sources of energy, solar power, wind power. There are going to be new regulations. People are going to be concerned about carbon emissions, climate change, and all the rest of it. And the ideal contract would have all those contingencies built in. If one of these things happens, then this is how we adjust the price, the quantity, the type of coal, and all that sort of thing. But in practice, lots of things are left out. And then a crucial question is, who gets to decide on the things that are left out? And we emphasize the idea that this is what ownership has a lot to do with. So the owner of the coal mine has residual control rights over the mine, or residual decision rights, the right to decide how the mine should be used to the extent that the contract doesn't specify the use. So if I'm the electricity company and you're the coal mine, and suddenly I want a different kind of coal, and it wasn't put in the contract that I could have that different coal, then I'm going to have to come to you and persuade you to mine a different coal. Why do I have to persuade you? Because it's your mine. In contrast, if I bought your mine and turn this into an in-house transaction, well then it would be my mine. There are lots of mines and mines are my mine, and I wouldn't have to ask your permission to change the coal because the coal mine belongs to me. Now, this is a very simple idea, but it had not really been, no one else had really I think, thought of it or said this is the key difference between the two situations, the one where we're separate companies and I own the electricity plant but you own the coal mine, and the other situation where I own both assets and I have all the residual control rights. So when people were trying to decide the difference between doing something inside a firm and between firms, as I say, there was a significant literature on this, but this idea that perhaps the key difference was who has residual control rights over the assets. That had not been put forward, and we did. And I think it's not like it's the full explanation. It's not as if once you have that, you have all the answers, and it would be great if once that sort of concept was out there, you could say, oh, well, now I know when the electricity plant should buy the coal mine and when they should stay separate. Or to give another example, that we have, that this theory has been applied to, and it was the Nobel Committee made quite a lot of this, public versus private services. So in the paper with Schleifer and Vishny, I analyzed, among other things, the question of whether the government should own a prison. If it wants to incarcerate people, should it own the prison in which they are held, or should the government contract with the private company to provide prison services? This is, of course, a very live issue in the United States and in other countries, because quite a few prisons are private, but also quite a few prisons are public. And we thought this is really the same question. Do you do it by contract, or do you have your employees do it? So it would be great if once you've decided that residual control rights are what is different between those two arrangements, who has the residual control rights over the prison. So if it's a government-owned prison and the people in the prison are government employees, then the government has residual control rights over the prison. And if it's a private company that the government contracts with, then the private provider has the residual control rights. So it would be great if once you've recognized this, you could say, well, now I know which prisons should be privatized and which ones shouldn't be. But unfortunately, the world isn't as simple as that. So I'm just saying, I think it was a very important idea, but it doesn't, unfortunately, you then have to do an awful lot of work to turn that idea into practical answers.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.